So first of all, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with my spiritual brother Wayne. And I don't mean that in the born again sense, by the way. I mean that more in the Western North Carolina hill-born sense. Um, and I've got several questions, and we'll sort of time it right. But I do want Wayne to have time to read a passage that he's picked out, maybe 15, 20 minutes in, and then obviously have a chance for all of you to interact with him. I also want to say that they posted the how you can order the book, right? Both books, the reissue of Requiem and Woodsmoke. So I'm going to put in my plug first and foremost. Order those books. Requiem would make a great Christmas present, by the way. But first question, Wayne. I can remember visiting back in Asheville when I was living in Chapel Hill a few years ago, and someone pointed out Cataloochee and said, essentially, that's it. That's the book, meaning that's the book about Western North Carolina, of course, but that's the book. And I bought it right there on the spot and read it and loved it. And so I'd like you to take a few minutes and talk about the relationship between Requiem by Fire and Cataloochee. And is it a sequel? Is it a companion? Are they brother and sister? How do you think about that?
Well, it's been a while, obviously, since these were published. Cataloochee first came out in 2007. I started writing these back around 2000, 2001. And at that point, I really didn't have any better sense than to think that I could sell a 600 or 700 page manuscript. You know, John Irving can do that. I can't. But the stories were together, and I just really lucked into a contract with Random House that said, okay, what you've got here is 2 books. And we just sort of split them up. And the natural divide was the trial that ended Cataloochee. And then Requiem by Fire became the story, at least as I tell it, of how the national park came to be, how they treated people, how people tried to deal with them, the human cost, in other words, of the national park. So that's sort of how that came to be. I originally thought of this as one story. I wasn't thinking sequel. And of course, Cataloochee came out in 07. And we remember what happened in 2008 as far as the economy goes. And Requiem was scheduled to be published in hardcover in 2010 when we had not recovered from that Great Recession yet. And Random just decided, we're not going to do a paperback. And what they should have done was a paperback first without the hardbound, but publishing. And so now we finally got a trade paperback edition of Requiem by Fire, and I am so proud of the way this thing looks and feels and smells. It's just a real great book. And Malaprop's Leaning Chair Press has really done a fine job on this. And Terry, you're right. Make an excellent Christmas gift.
So Santa and his elves are in the house, and I think our friends from Malaprops, not to name any names, would love it if they became elves in a good cause as well. So yeah. I have to say, I love Requiem by Fire. I've read it now 3 times. Each time I've read it, it's grown in my mind and in terms of its impact. I want to say, though, right before I'm holding up my copy without the cover, there is a partial list of characters.
Right.
There are on that list 37 names. And I counted them twice, by the way, so I think I got my math right, as well as extensive notes about who's related to who. These are mountain families, right? So a lot of these people are married to their cousins and so forth. Hopefully they're second cousins, but you get, it's all webbed together. So here's my question. When you think about Requiem by Fire, and of course Cataloochee's in that mix as well, is this a story about a place, or is it a story about these people, would you say?
The short answer to that is yes. We were trying our best to find, my agent and I were trying our best to find a good title for Cataloochee. And all of a sudden we just said, it's Cataloochee. That's the only thing we can call this book. And taken together, these books are the story of both of a community and of a bunch of families who are interconnected. My agent is a good New Yorker. She's and that's probably all I need to say about that. And one of the things that she always said, you've got too many people in these books. And they all seem to have the same last name. What's going on with that? And I just told her, you look at a census record of Buncombe County or Haywood County or wherever around here in 1850, and that's what you're going to find. So yeah, we've got both things going. The place Cataloochee is just as much a character to me as Ezra Banks or any of these other people.
No, I agree. I think the place is paramount to the story, and I would also say the best of mountain fiction has that characteristic that these are stories and novels about places, very distinct places. And that's powerful. There are other places in America, of course, that have that, but mountain fiction is a wonderful thing. Well, I want to get now around to talking about a character. There are half dozen characters in Requiem by Fire that will never forget. We can talk about some of them, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Willie McPeters. I didn't know what a pyrophiliac was until I met Willie McPeters. And he is truly a demonic antagonist. He's a villain of a special sort. And I'd love for you to spend a few minutes and talk about, there are many wonderful people, meaning people you would want to know, have dinner with, correspond with in Requiem, but not Willie McPeters.
Not Willie. No,
not Willie. Not. Talk a little bit about where he came from. No story ever suffered that has a truly great villain. And this is a powerful villain. Where did that come from, do you think?
Well, I don't want to talk about Willie in too much depth because I noticed my grandson's in the audience and he's a little bit young for this.
Okay.
But I will say that he shares some DNA with several literary figures. One is Pat Finn, out of Huck Finn, Huckleberry Finn, and also out of my friend John Clinch's novel, Finn, which came out the same year as Cataloochee did. I probably was thinking, at least subconsciously, about Olab Snopes in Faulkner's the Snopes trilogy. Ab was a barn burner. He was just a nasty guy. He talked more than Willie did, I guess, but there's some of that DNA in there too. And then I know that I was thinking about Cormac McCarthy's Child of God. I had probably read that fairly recently, and I was thinking, can I create a character that's as good a bad guy as Lester Ballard? And I was actually trying for that mark, and I think I probably hit it. Yeah. But I know that when I gave my wife Mary the typescript to read, she came to me and she said, "Where did this come from?" Like, every writer's supposed to have a little bit of himself in all of his characters or her characters, and she was just horrified. She'd been living with me for 40 odd years and hadn't seen this part of me at all. But she's still with me. So
I was going to say, she's still with you. So
absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, there's some literary ancestry to this. I think I probably just had to get this Southern Gothic grotesque thing done and out of the way, and now I don't have to do it again.
Yeah.
And the sexual business about Willie, I'm not quite sure where that came from, but it seemed to fit with his character and the recurring motif of fire all through the book. This is the absolute negative thing about fire. This is destruction. This is
Well, all right. That you anticipated the next question. Of the four elements, earth, wind, fire, and air, and I'll mention this only to say that I was aware of it from the get-go in reading Requiem. When I published Holy Ghost Speakeasy and Revival, down at the bottom, little subtitle says a novel of fire and water, because there's a flood and so forth. But this is a novel of fire, and you know it, and I know it, and you mentioned the negative aspect of fire. Talk a little bit about Requiem, about that title. Cataloochee was obviously the title of the first book, and I agree with you and your agent there. It could be named nothing else.
Right.
But why Requiem by fire, do you think?
Well, my main character, of the two main characters in the book, Jim and Silas, Silas needs to rest. And that's what we say, requiescat in pacem. That's the Requiem. I was sitting in church at First Baptist one night while I was writing this, and they were doing Rudder's Requiem as their big piece for that night. And all of a sudden it just hit me. I've got to use that in this title. And what Silas comes to rest in this dream that he has at the end of the book is fire. And I take that to be an annealing kind of fire. I take that to be a purgative kind of fire, something that will make something nice out of something that wasn't so nice. And I think that's what the book is trying to get to. I didn't really set out to say, well, I'm going to have a fire in every chapter or anything like that, but that's just sort of how it came to be. The other aspect of fire that's negative, of course, is what happens with Jim Hawkins, who is ordered by his boss to burn his home place. And I have to say, when I finished that chapter in Rough Draft, I was weeping. And it didn't get much better as the drafts went on. You know, and I can still shed a tear or two at that chapter. And his boss, Mr. Evans, I haven't got any use for him at all, as you can probably tell. But to be so low down as to order him to do all of that and knowing good and well why you were doing it, I don't know if it happened that way in the historical Cataloochee or not, but it had to happen that way in the novel.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one that sheds a tear in that chapter. That's it's powerful. It's I don't know what to call it. It's canceling yourself almost. Is what Jim is asked to do. Well, will you read a little for us? I've got my eye on the watch, and I know our Malaprop's friends, Patricia, Stephanie, do as well. But I know there's something you want to read, and you read it beautifully. So go for it.
Well, as I said, Silas is the main character. Is really my main character here. By the way, I don't know if Stephen Woody's in the audience tonight, but I borrowed his grandfather as the basis of this character, and I'm kind of glad he loaned him to me. Silas is not a churchgoer, and he's not a particularly happy guy. He's kind of cynical, as a matter of fact, and this is just some of his thinking one day when he's going to the mail, going to the post office and back, thinking about the 80-odd years of his life and what he has seen and experienced. Hell to get old, 80. Aches and pains in places I didn't even know I had 2 years ago, or to sit and stare at the mountains all until dinner time. I miss the chestnuts. Their yellow was prettier than maples or tulip trees, and big, lordy, them was trees, trees God was proud of. A man could build anything out of them. Now they're gone. Used to see them yellow-headed parakeets, gone. Pigeons, flocks used to hide the sun, gone. Me too, soon enough. Wonder how gone will feel. He leaned against the rail and shut his eyes. 5 minutes later, he jerked awake. What in the hell am I doing? Only a Rockefeller can afford to nap away a morning. And he goes on and decides he's going to go to the post office after dinner. Later that afternoon, he rode to Nellie to find no mail, which any more suited him. No meddling government that day. He took his time returning, sitting the horse halfway home to watch yellow jackets line into the roadside. He dismounted and, tiptoeing, tied a piece of shirt tail to the overarching dog hobble to help him find the nest hole toward dark. Wonder if I need one of them permits to burn these things out. Damn government. The way we're headed, Washington will take a notion to breed the damn thing. The tourists will get stung so bad, some peckerhead bureaucrat will say that was so good, let's restock rattlesnakes. Next thing you know, they'll bring in packs of wolves. Hell, I remember my daddy talking about getting a $10 bounty for a wolf pelt. They'll end up bringing back beavers, elk. I'd not be surprised by it. And it goes on, but you can get a little bit of the flavor of Silas's thinking on that. And I just had to have that bit about the elk in there. I remember when they brought them in, and I wasn't all that happy about it.
So who do you, and you know, we get asked this all the time, right? But who, and maybe Silas, I don't know, maybe Jim, but who do you most identify with in this novel? And it can be more than one, because you got, what did I tell you, 37
is what you said.
37 to choose from.
And there are more named characters than that.
Oh, I know. Partial list. Yeah.
The one that I most closely identified with in these two stories was the young boy named Ras Carter. Mm-hmm. In Cataloochee, he's the one that went up on the mountain and got scared by the rattlesnake. And as a matter of fact, I liked him so much that I thought he needed his own book. And I, in fact, wrote a novel with him as the main character, which I'm still trying to find somebody to publish it. So if anybody out there is interested in that, let me know. It's called Memoirs of an Unambitious Lawyer. And in my view of things, Ras went on to become a lawyer and come back to Asheville, actually, and have a long career as a real estate man. And I think it's a pretty good novel. We'll see if it ever gets published. But anyway, he's the character I most identified with. There's a lot of me in Jim, and there's a lot of me in Silas too. So in Requiem, my favorite character probably has to be Silas.
Yeah.
But Jim's a close second.
Yeah. There's a sense to me that Jim and Silas are point and counterpoint in a way. They're generational, right? Silas
right.
is the of that previous century almost. The not so religious, the cussing with the government, he will stay on the land till his last breath. Jim, on the other hand, is a man of compromise. He's torn between this place and time and the next place and time. So I see that. I, like you, identify with both. I think they between them almost span 100 years. It feels like.
Yeah. And that was probably conscious, although I've told people for years I don't write from an outline. I wouldn't know what to do with an outline if I had it. These things just sort of happen. Mm-hmm. But that's how Jim and Silas coalesced. And I shed some tears at that last chapter too. because Jim finds Silas and he is resting, and Jim's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And the final line out of that chapter I took from Paradise Lost. He made his solitary way out of Silas's house, and that to me is, maybe I'm weird, but my academic training, I've read a lot of Milton, and that scene in Paradise Lost is as poignant as there's anything in literature.
Yeah.
The biblical scene and the Miltonic scene.
And he's alone.
Yeah.
At the end. I mean, obviously it says that he made a solitary way, but he is alone because he's lost, in many ways, his best friend. He's lost his family.
Yeah.
Well, it's a marvelous book. I'm a huge fan of this book, and I'm delighted that Leaning Chair Press chose it first. There's a justice to that we don't always see in the writing trade, and so here's to it. And Patricia, I'm going to hand the ball back to you because you've been thinking about questions from the. I've got 100 questions, but we should let everybody else ask their questions as well.
And then I think I'm sharing this with Stephanie. Stephanie, are you looking at the chat as well?
I am, yes. And I actually have a question to start. Wayne, we were talking a little bit sort of before we started the event. Actually, Terry was speaking about writing during the pandemic and actually having some more space to write. And I wanted to pose that question to you. I'll pose it to you now. You just gave us a little bit of insight into your writing process and that you're not an outliner.
Right.
And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit to your writing life. And then if you want to talk about whether or not that's changed with you know, the different reality we're inhabiting now with the pandemic as well.
Well, it has changed because of the pandemic, and also because I retired from a day job during 2019, and that was really good timing because I would not have wanted to try to keep a small business afloat in 2020. That would have destroyed whatever creative energy I had. But I have been writing this year more pointedly than I have been because I've had more energy to do it. I've written half of a novel. I think it's the first half. We'll see about that. And I've also finished working on the poems that go into Woodsmoke and that will be out in February. I'm not a terribly disciplined writer. My friend Terry gets up at some ridiculous hour in the morning and sits in front of his computer and writes. I couldn't do that to save my life. I think over this past year, I've been a little more focused about that than usual. It's real funny. I remember when I first met Lee Smith. Lee and I got to talking. She said, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, furniture business, one thing or another. And she looked at me and she said, "Well, when do you have time to read?" And I thought she was going to say, "When do you have time to write?" But no, that was, and I've been doing a lot of reading this year. And it's probably not good for your bookstore, but I have, as you can probably tell behind me here, I've got a lot of books and I'm rereading stuff instead of buying books. And that has given, every time I read something like one of Wendell Berry's novels, I learn something. Every time I go back and pick up a McCarthy or a Faulkner, or, whoever, Kent Harif, every time I pick up one of those, I learn something. So that's probably about as deep as I want to go with that one.
Okay. Well, and there's no sin in rereading. We don't fault you for that. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about books. You know, they can be so different each time you pick them up. You can find new things, and I think books meet us where we are when we read them. And so, you know, a lot of times it's worth revisiting them for sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we had a request actually from someone in the audience, and feel free to say no, because this would be a little bit of a preview. But I will go ahead and put out the request and see if you're interested. Erica asks if you would read a poem from the new collection, and if not from the new collection, maybe just a poem.
I'll be glad. I'll read 5 or 6 if you want me to.
Patricia is all over it. Patricia really loves the reading. So if you'll read a poem, that's great.
The voice in Woodsmoke is an old fellow named Posey Green, who's a little bit like Silas in Requiem by Fire, and he's a little bit like me, but he heats with wood. He's in his 80s. He still works firewood all the time. And a lot of the poems are about fire and firewood. And Terry, I'm continuing a theme here. I realize that, but this is more of an annealing fire than a destructive fire. This poem's called Firewood in Heaven. They're bound to have firewood in heaven. And notice my Haywood County pronunciation there. They're bound to have firewood in heaven. I bet it splits easy and straight, don't splinter, burns without being consumed, and don't smoke up the place. Down here, before thistles and sweat, Adam and Eve played in paradise, naked as a pair of plucked jaybirds. But after God set flaming swords there over east of Eden, they needed heat against what wasn't yet known as winter. I can hear them now, kind of like this. What's that I feel, Adam? I think I'll call it cold. What to do? More of them clothes he give us, I reckon. Will it stay cold? Don't know. Might get colder. I sure am ashamed. Honey, it ain't your fault. And I imagine right then Jesus stole a coal from heaven's heater and shot lightning at a gopher wood tree to give them folks fire, for warmth, for hot food, for revelation. Adam and Eve were human, and I don't know a body who won't search deep inside a fire, looking for both heat and spirit comfort, which they sorely needed. I got a notion our first parents' first fire still burns, a kind of ancestor flame, really present in anything from my old heater to my neighbor's fancy foreign stove to them old-time Pentecost tongues of fire. Every lick of flame, a gift from God's fireplace.
Thank you.
Posey doesn't go to church much, but he thinks about his Bible a lot.
He's probably not alone in that. Thank you for reading. And I will just go ahead and take a moment for a little shameless plug and remind folks that we will be meeting again online with you and with Ron Rash to celebrate the release of Woodsmoke. And that book comes out on February 23rd, and we'll be joining you for another event for that book on the following day on February 24th. So
we hope I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. And so that brings me to another question, actually, in part because it's something that Ron had sort of spoken about at length. So you write poetry, you write novels. I know you've written shorter fiction as well. Do you have a favorite? Does it vary from time to time, or is there something that you would really rather be writing at any given point in terms of the type of product?
Well, when Woodsmoke started, I was working on a piece of long fiction, and my experience with long fiction is it's good to write, and you can make mistakes in it that you can't make in a short story or a poem. Hopefully you'll go back and find those mistakes and correct them, but you know, that's just the shorter form requires it requires each word to do duty. You know, you can't have these throwaway phrases and stuff like that. Anyway, I was working on this long fiction piece, and this guy named Posey Green just sort of walked into my head and started talking. And it irritated me at first because I was trying to focus on this other story. And then I just sort of, okay, I give up, talk. And I listened to him, and it was maybe over a period of a year and a half or 2 years that I came up with this little collection of poems. And at that point, that was what I needed to do. I don't know why. I do kind of know why. I was kind of stuck on this long piece of fiction, and needed to get a little distance from it. And it was kind of an emotional thing for me to be writing, and I just needed that. So I'm glad Posey showed up. I've heard writers say that they watch their characters and it's kind of like some sort of mental illness, but it really is what happens. They kind of walk in and start talking, and you just kind of listen to them and write it down. If you try to make them say something they don't want to say, they ain't gonna say it. So that's been my experience anyway. I don't really have a favorite. Probably short fiction and poetry, I'd have to say would be, I don't know what the word is. They're just very different. The novels that I've published have been very rewarding in terms of just, you know, here's this big piece of work I've put out there, and people like it, and that's very fulfilling. But the poems, I've got some 4-line poems in here that you know, I think are really meaningful to me, and I hope they'll be meaningful to others. Well, and
it is so often things that are very short that can just have a massive impact. There are sometimes when, you know, a few words just have more mass than a lot of words, you know, that everything is just more densely packed in those few words, which does make it seems to me, would make it harder to write in shorter forms.
Well, I think of the difference between, say, The Wasteland and So Much Depends on the Wheelbarrow and the Chickens and the Rainwater. I very much prefer The Chickens and the Rainwater.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on to a question from the audience. Mary asks, how did your PhD in literature, and I like this phrasing, assist/impede your composition of these novels and your poetry?
Okay. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, except to say that I got the PhD in the 70s, and I didn't start scribbling until the late 90s. So I had 25 years to get over the PhD.
Get over it.
Well, what the PhD taught me was not how to write, but how to read. And I've been a reader all my life, and that just, the degree just sort of honed that. It taught me how to do research. And I like to do research, and I hope I haven't left too much of it sticking out in the novels, but I know there was a scene in Cataloochee where Ezra was going to hang a door. I don't know why he was going to hang a door. And just one night I thought he needed to hang a door. I didn't know how to hang a door. So I did a lot of research on hanging a door, and that little section ended up being, I think it was 15 or 16 double-spaced pages, and words in it like escutcheons and, you know, stuff like that. And it ended up in the printed book being, I think, a paragraph or maybe 2. You got to get rid of all that stuff, but you need to work through the research to make sure what you're doing is right. The scary thing is I had a friend who was looking at Ezra's toolbox when he read the book. And in it, Ezra picks up a brace and bit, and he puts it up to his ear, and he hears the gears in it. And my friend called me and he said, in that year, the gears would have been wooden, not metal. Okay. You know, I hope that I'll not have my feet held to the fire too much by that, but I didn't know. Well, anyway, the PhD has been fine. You know, that's good, but it has not, I hope, not gotten into the way of the fiction. I've read a lot of fiction, and I think I know what I'm about there, but it's, yeah, academia didn't ruin me. I'll put it that way.
Well, that's good to know. And I don't know how wide this idea might be, but my guess is that some people might not understand why a lot of research would even be necessary for fiction. Mm-hmm. You know, and thinking, well, you know, you're just making up a story, but you know, good fiction has to feel real, even if it's science fiction, fantasy, magical realism. You know, it still has to feel real, and details, you know, like how you hang a door, whether all of those words end up in the final product or not. Even if you don't know that that's what's helping sell it for the reader, like those are the kinds of things that do, and they inform, you know, your process when you're writing, you know, knowing those things as well, as opposed to guessing. Yes, I'm always amazed and impressed by the amount of research that fiction writers do, you know, good fiction writers. So we'll thank the PhD work for for that, for sure.
Yeah, it was not in vain.
Absolutely, yeah, that was a good question. Mary actually had another question, and I don't want to ask you to embody an experience that's not yours, so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. But she was asking, we were talking earlier about stories of place and stories of people, stories of individuals. Mm-hmm. And because the place that we inhabit, you know, and all of the places in the United States used to be indigenous places, inhabited by indigenous people, she was curious about how you might imagine indigenous writers dealing with those same questions, like the questions that your characters are dealing with, often about the loss of place in different ways. And again, I don't want you to, you know, I don't ask you to embody an experience that's not yours in terms of indigenous writers, but perhaps if you can speak to having, you know, essentially being from here, right. And knowing that we are on Cherokee land and the land of other indigenous people in this area, what thought you might have given to, or how that might have informed your thinking about place.
To be real honest about it, I came to Cataloochee thinking that was my ancestral ground. Not that the Cherokee were there before my people were. I have since learned a lot about that sort of thing. Yeah, my grandfather was actually born in Cataloochee. My great-grandfather was born there. I've got people buried all over the cemeteries out there. And that's where I came to it, from a white guy's family, okay? And knowing that the Cherokee presence had been there. And I remember listening to one of my cousins who was actually born there, and she claimed that her father knew Cherokee. And I thought that was curious, because in that time frame, the Cherokee didn't know Cherokee. It had become kind of a lost tongue to them as well. She told about how her family, our family, hid the Cherokee in 1838 back up in the caves in Cataloochee, back up on Spruce Mountain. And I don't know whether that's true or not. Simply because a lot of the things that she was saying, just probably couldn't be true. And you get to talking about a lot of us white folks who have been in the North Carolina mountains for years. We've all got a Cherokee princess back there somewhere in the that we have appropriated out of that culture. So I really haven't atoned for any sins or anything like that in my writing, because I really wasn't all that conscious about it. But the removal was done so well by Charles Frazier in 13 Moons that's a subject that I just couldn't touch. And I'm glad that he did that. And I'm glad that that book is still around, because we need to know about that kind of thing. I'm writing a book about the removal of white people. By and large, there may have been some other blood in there that Harrogate in the story may have had a little Melungeon about him. We just really don't know about that, but it's mainly the story that you tell about the national park is the removal of white people who have been there for 2 or 3 generations. And what a terrible thing that was. Well, how many generations had the Cherokee been there? And that's just something that I have, in my own cultural heritage, I haven't been taught to address, and therefore I didn't address it. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that's a sin or not, I don't know.
Well, I think the way you're speaking about it, sin doesn't really come into play, because it's just important to recognize, where we have gaps and to try and fill them, which it seems like you're doing, and to not, and you're very conscious of that appropriation of Indigenous culture that happens so often with folks who kind of romanticize and grow up with these apocryphal family stories and
right.
That gloss over the tragedy of the removal and then land on this these other ideas about how people live here, and so thank you for thoughtfully answering that question, because I think it is important. I think more people importantly and necessarily are looking at these questions in a way that maybe we haven't before, and as long as we do, eventually that's something. So thank you. And then Mary, thank you for sharing your journey of understanding with us, which I think is a great way to put it. So I want to invite, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to invite folks from the audience to ask any other questions if they had them. And then, but I also want to go back to Terry to see if you had any more questions. And also, Wayne, if you don't mind, to also give Terry just a moment to tell us a little bit about his upcoming novel.
I was going to bring that up.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So Terry, first, if you have any additional questions, for Wayne.
I think one of the things Wayne does best, not because he himself is old, I know better. he works firewood way too much to be considered old, but he does. Just as some writers do children well, some writers do different genders well, some writers do characters of a certain type. I think Silas, Posey Green, other characters, Wayne, you do extraordinarily well with age, the idea of aging and wisdom, and the notion that in our contemporary culture that wisdom even exists. How often do you even hear the word? but that wisdom resides in the elders in a community, I think has been lost to us. And I every time I read in your fiction, I'm struck by that you still not just revere it, but capture it. And I'd love for you to say just a little bit about that. Why the heck is it do you do that so well? I wish I could do it as well.
I don't know the answer to that, Terry. I've never been asked that question, but what comes to my mind is a very formative part of my own being is that I lost my father when I was 16, and he was 52. Now, when you're 16 and your 52-year-old father dies, you think he was old. I no longer think 52 was old. I did not know any of my grandparents except my paternal grandmother, and she was not my favorite person at all. So in the absence of the sort of thing you're talking about, maybe that's why I've created this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to think about that a while, but I think that the way my father's death hit me when I was a high school student, I think that came very close to knocking me off the tracks. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. It's just I'd have to think about that. Thank you for the compliment.
Well, it's genuine. You and I'll have to talk more about that offline. My father died when I was 27, and even at that point, it felt like, the earth shook. Mm-hmm. And
yes.
In some ways, it's still shaking. All these years later. So, yeah. Well, wisdom resides in the elders. Everybody on this call, just remember that. Not only is it true in life, but it's true in Wayne's wonderful books as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Stephanie, do you want me to say a bit about?
Yeah, just tell us a little bit about about your since we mentioned it in the introduction there, and Wayne's graciously wants to give you the floor for that.
The 90 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, the new book is titled "My Mistress' Eyes Are Raven Black," which is a line from one of Shakespeare's sonnets. It is set in 1920 on Ellis Island in New York Harbor. So it's very much a departure for me in terms of setting. I imagine Cataloochee, Ellis Island, and that's a pretty broad stretch there. However, the connection is that it's narrated by Stephen Robbins, the same character that narrated A Short Time to Stay Here. So he's a mountain man. He didn't come from Cataloochee, but he almost could have. He was a runaway after his father died when he was quite young. And he's followed a woman he loves to New York City, and eventually that relationship doesn't work out. But he is sent, he's something of a detective. And this book is very much intended to be a noir detective. I hate to use this word, but thriller. It's a dark book, but it's about someone who's murdering immigrants on Ellis Island, in the Ellis Island hospitals, which are these massive, sprawling hospital system. Most people don't know this, but they were on Ellis Island. And so it has to do with xenophobia in a way, why we hate and fear the other, regardless of who we consider the other to be. And Stephen, at a very sort of fractured and desperate time in his own life, with the help of a woman he meets there, a nurse, sets about trying to solve this mystery. And I will say in passing, I had the idea and started working on the novel before our current president came down the escalator at Trump Tower in New York City and said, "We're going to build a wall and we're going to shut out those bad people." Well, the longer I worked on the novel, the more relevant it became to our contemporary drama, our contemporary concerns. And Wayne's read it and wrote a very nice blurb for it. But so it's It's about 1920, but it's also very much about 2020. So.
Great. Well, we have that to look forward to in the summer, and we'll keep an eye out for that. And Wayne, I want to ask, I have another request for you before we close this evening. And I'm sorry we didn't give you the heads up on this. So if it's too much of a blindside, just let me know. Would you've mentioned that you've been doing a lot of reading. Mm-hmm. Do you have a recommendation you'd like to make besides your books and Terry's books, obviously? Anything that you'd like to recommend for folks?
Oh, goodness. I think I mentioned Wendell Berry. I've been reading a lot of Wendell Berry lately, not only the essays, but the fiction. And I need to go back through the poems because that's how I got started with Wendell. But as far as I'm concerned, any title of his would be well worth the buying and the reading. The essays are enough to make you scratch your head and think, if this man's right, we are headed to hell in a hand bucket. So if you don't want to be any more depressed than you already are, you might not want to read the essays right now. But the fiction is very much, I'd say it's centered on a small community in Kentucky. And the community reminds me very much of Cataloochee, and the characters are all interrelated and all of that stuff. So if you like my stuff, I think you're going to like his. I mentioned Kent Harif, the late Kent Harif, and any of his stuff I think is very. He's a Colorado writer that I don't think gets enough attention east of the Mississippi. But Plain Song and I forget all the titles there. Start with Plain Song and kind of go through that would be my advice. Marilynne Robinson is, to my way of thinking, a marvelous writer. And her 4 novels that are centered around the preacher family in Iowa. You've got a title named Jack on your shelves right now that is her latest, which I've read. And I would recommend, if you read those, I would say get the first one, which I believe is Gilead. Not sure, but go through Gilead and Lila and whatever the other one is, and then read Jack. That's the way I would do it. And of course, Housekeeping is her first, and it's just a knock your socks off novel. Oh gosh, I don't know. Those are the ones that come to my mind just off the top of my head. And we're getting toward the end of the hour here.
Yeah. Well, and that's great. And we always know the voracious readers by, even when there's no preparation, how the answer to that question goes. And also the former teachers.
Oh, and by the way, I picked up a book last week that I was glad to see. You're showing a book in the store of Breeze Pancake's collected works. Mm. And that's a West Virginia writer who needs to be read a lot, even though he killed himself when he was, I think, like 26. He left a body of work that's just really, I think, really important for Appalachian folks, particularly to read.
And there's a lot of excellent work that's been done just recently by regional writers, by Appalachian writers. Mm-hmm. I'll if you don't mind, I'll give a little plug, since we were talking a bit about local Indigenous people, to Annette Sanook Clapsaddle, who is the first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet, but I'm getting around to it.
Yeah, everybody should put it on their TBR pile, their to be read pile. And she happens to be the first member of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee to publish a novel. And there's just a lot, like I say, particularly Appalachian writers, and we've hosted events with several of them, and so we hope people will check out our YouTube channel for past events and shop with us online or make an appointment. And also you know, you can communicate with us on social media as well. Let us know what you're reading also, everyone. So I want to go ahead and draw to a close by first thanking Wayne and Terry for being here, and thanking everyone in the audience for being here. We know that you have demands on your time, and we really appreciate you sharing this time with us this evening. We appreciate you being part of the Malaprops community in whatever way you can be, and we're so grateful to everyone who is part of our community, and we have y'all to thank for being around for 38 years and for being able to continue, particularly through this very challenging time. So we're very grateful for that. We want to encourage you again to order Requiem by Fire from Malaprops. Because of the pandemic, to the largest degree, everything is slow and strange. And so we're waiting for copies to come in. We're celebrating the release today, but printing and mailing are their own things. But please go ahead and order them. Rest assured, we will get them to you as soon as possible. We can also gift wrap. And because Wayne lives here in the area, you can get your copy signed. So when you order your book, you can put in a request for a signed or personalized copy. Wayne, I'm not speaking out of turn there, am I?
No, not at all.
Yeah, Wayne will personalize for you as well, which will make a great gift. So we encourage you to go ahead and get your order in, and we'll get those orders filled as soon as we can. And of course, we also encourage you to order Terry's books as well. And you can find all those on our website. Patricia's been posting all those links in chat, which you can refer back to and copy and paste real quick or save the chat. And we just thank you so much. And so I will leave the last two words to first Terry and then Wayne, so that Wayne, you have the actual last word for this evening. Terry?
I'm going to read the last sentence from Requiem by Fire. He looked eastward and then made his solitary way to his horse.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to read a 5-line poem out of Woodsmoke. It's called Important Questions. The older I get, the more I dwell on 3 important questions. Why would God have made a flea? What do possums think about? Do crows ever have cold feet? There's your wisdom for it, Stephanie.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Please have a wonderful evening, and please stay safe and stay well. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.